Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had gojo and sakuna powers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had lost its color. That was Izuku Midoriya's first coherent thought as he stood on the edge of the rooftop, the wind a hollow mourner in his ears. The vibrant cityscape of Mizurufu, usually a dazzling tapestry of chrome, glass, and bold advertisements, now looked like a faded photograph. The sky was a flat, washed-out gray. The chatter of the streets below was a dull, meaningless drone. It was as if someone had turned down the saturation on his entire existence, leaving only the drab reality of his failure. All Might's words echoed in the empty spaces of his mind, each syllable a perfectly polished stone dropped into the placid pool of his dreams, shattering the reflection forever. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic. Realistic. Izuku's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. He had been realistic his entire life. He knew the statistics. 20% of the population was quirkless, a number that dwindled with every new generation. He knew the societal stigma, the pitying looks, the dismissive sneers that followed the word quirkless, like a shadow. He knew the physical limitations. He had the frail, breakable body of a boy who had never once produced a spark, a gust of wind, or even a slightly elongated fingernail. But hope, he had learned, was not a realistic emotion. It was an irrational, stubborn weed that grew in the cracks of certainty. It was fueled by grainy video clips of a smiling giant pulling a bus full of people from a collapsed bridge. It was nurtured by meticulously detailed notes in 13 burnt and battered notebooks. Hope had told him that if he was smart enough, brave enough, and dedicated enough, he could bridge the genetic chasm that separated him from everyone else. All Might, the living embodiment of that hope, had just taken a sledgehammer to the bridge. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, the wind whipping tears from their corners before they could even fall. He felt a profound hollowness in his chest, a cavern carved out by the hero's well-meaning but devastating honesty. He wasn't angry at All Might. How could he be? The man was right. He was a frail, quirkless kid. What could he possibly have done against the villain? He'd frozen up earlier, just a worthless obstacle during All Might's pursuit of the sludge villain. He would have gotten himself killed. He was just a useless Deku. The thought wasn't new, but it had never felt so final. Kaken's taunts had always been sharp, but they were barbs from a rival. He could dismiss them, file them away as bullying. But this was a verdict from God himself. He took a shuffling step back from the edge, his legs feeling like they were filled with wet sand. The trek down the stairs was an out-of-body experience. Each clank of his red sneakers on the metal steps was a drumbeat in a funeral dirge for his future. He didn't know where he was going. Home, probably. His mom would see his face and her own would crumple with that heart-wrenching sympathy he'd come to dread. She would apologize as if it were her fault, and the weight of her sadness would be another stone on his already crushing burden. He emerged onto the street, blinking in the muted afternoon light. People bustled past him, their faces a blur of indifference. They all had places to be, lives to live, quirks to use. They were part of the world. He was just a spectator, a ghost haunting the edges of a reality he could never truly join. He was so lost in the gray fog of his misery that he almost didn't hear it at first. A distant boom, followed by a chorus of panic screams. Izuku's head lifted, his ears tuning into the familiar symphony of chaos. A villain attack. His body, on pure, agonizing instinct, turned towards the sound. His feet began to move, carrying him forward before his brain had given the command. It was a compulsion, the same one that had driven him to scribble notes, for a decade. Have to see. Have to analyze. Have to learn. The old habits were dying hard. He rounded a corner, and saw the source of the commotion. A crowd was gathered at the mouth of a narrow commercial alleyway, their phones held high like offerings to a modern deity. Plumes of black smoke billowed into the sky, thick and acrid. The sharp scent of burned sugar and ozone stung his nostrils. It was the Tatooine shopping district. He pushed his way through the throng of gawkers, murmuring apologies as he squeezed between bodies. The scene that greeted him was one he recognized with a sickening lurch of his stomach. It was the sludge villain. The same one All Might had captured, the one Izuku had foolishly latched onto, causing the hero to drop the bottles. This is my fault. The realization was a punch to the gut, so forceful it knocked the air from his lungs. If he hadn't interfered, hadn't wasted All Might's time with his pathetic, desperate questions, the villain would still be safely in custody. The heroes on the scene were struggling. Death Arms was busy rescuing civilians from the fires the villain's rampage had started, his powerful arms useless against an amorphous enemy. Kamui Woods was evacuating people further down the street, his wood-based quirk a massive liability against the inferno. Backdraft was doing his best to contain the blaze, but it was spreading too quickly, and in the center of it all, a familiar silhouette thrashed within the suffocating green ooze. Spiky, ash-blonde hair. The crackle and pop of explosions, muffled and weak. Kaken. The world, which had been gray and distant, snapped into horrifying, high-definition focus. He could see the terror in Bakugo's eyes, the wild, desperate plea for help that his pride would never allow him to voice. He was suffocating. He was being used as a human shield, his powerful explosion quirk turned into a weapon of indiscriminate destruction. Izuku's blood ran cold. He saw All Might in the crowd, gaunt and skeletal in his civilian form, clutching his side. He saw the pained helplessness in the hero's eyes, the same look of grim realism he had directed at Izuku just minutes ago. He was out of time. He couldn't transform. No one was coming to save the day. The other heroes were either ill-equipped or outmatched. They were all just waiting. Waiting for a hero with the right quirk. Izuku's body was frozen, his feet rooted to the pavement. Every fiber of his being screamed at him. Run away. You can't do anything. You're quirkless. You'll die. All Might's voice was a warden in his mind, locking him in a cage of logic and fear. You have to be realistic. But then he saw it. Through the sludge and the smoke, he saw Bakugo's eyes meet his. For a split second, the sneering mask of the bully was gone. There was no arrogance, no anger. There was only pure, unadulterated terror. It was the look of someone who knew they were going to die. And in that moment, Izuku Midoriya stopped thinking. He didn't know why his legs moved. He couldn't explain the surge of adrenaline that bypassed every rational thought in his head. All he knew was that his friend was dying, and his body was moving. He burst through the police line, a frantic, green blur against the chaos. Kid! Stop! It's suicide! Death Arms yelled, but Izuku didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a single, desperate objective. He ran, his backpack bouncing wildly. He fumbled with the strap, his mind racing, searching for any possible advantage. Analysis. What did I write in my notes? Weaknesses? Eyes. If I can just create an opening, distract him for a second. He swung his heavy yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in the eye. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its slimy form momentarily loosening its grip on Bakugo. It was the opening Bakugo needed. He managed to gasp a ragged breath of air. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? He choked out, his voice a mix of fury and fear. I don't know. Izuku screamed back, his legs still pumping, closing the distance. My legs just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die, Kaken. He clawed uselessly at the sludge, his fingers finding no purchase. It was like trying to grab water. The villain, recovering its composure, swiped at him with a massive tendril. Izuku was too close, too slow. He had no quirk to dodge, no power to counter. This was it. This was the stupid, pointless end he had been warned about. He stumbled, his foot catching on a piece of shattered pavement from the ongoing battle. He went down hard, his hands scraping against the rough asphalt. The world tilted, a chaotic swirl of smoke, fire, and green slime. The villain's attack was a heartbeat away from impact. His right hand, flailing to break his fall, landed on something hard and cold in a pile of rubble and trash near the alley wall. It wasn't a rock. It felt strangely organic, yet hard as stone. The texture was rough, like petrified wood, and it was unnervingly cool to the touch despite the fires raging nearby. There was no time to process. There was only instinct. His eyes flicked down for a nanosecond. It was a finger, A gnarled, grotesque thing, dark crimson in color, almost black. It was thick and bent at an unnatural angle, with a long, jagged nail at its tip. It looked ancient, mummified, but it pulsed with a strange, malevolent energy that he could feel in his bones. It was a feeling of immense power, of profound evil, of a hunger that had spanned centuries. It felt wrong. It felt like a violation of the natural order, and in that single, reality-bending moment of pure, undiluted desperation, Izuku Midoriya's hero-obsessed, logic-deprived brain made a catastrophic leap. A quirk booster? An old artifact? Something that can give me power? It was insane. It was the logic of a drowning man grabbing at a snake. He knew nothing about it, but it felt powerful. And right now, power was the only thing that mattered. The villain's tendril was descending. Kaken was choking. All Might was helpless. There was no time for a better plan. With a final, desperate sob, he snatched the object from the ground. It was heavy, solid in his palm. Without a second thought, without allowing the rational part of his brain to scream in protest, he brought it to his lips. The texture was vile, the taste like ash and dried blood. He swallowed. It went down his throat like a jagged stone, a painful, scraping journey into the pit of his stomach. For a moment, nothing happened. The villain's tendril was inches from his face. He could smell its swampy stench. He had failed. It was just a disgusting piece of trash. Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A cataclysmic detonation of energy that erupted from the very core of his being. It was a force so immense, so utterly alien, that it felt like a star had been born and died within his ribcage in the same instant. A wave of crushing pressure radiated from him, kicking up a storm of dust and debris. The air grew thick, heavy, and cold, charged with an unspeakable malice. Izuku felt a searing pain rip through him, as if every cell in his body was being torn apart and rewritten. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the energy pouring out of him. Black, intricate markings, like ancient, arcane tattoos, raced across his skin, flowing over his arms, up his neck, and across his face. They felt like brands of ice and fire. The most terrifying change happened to his face. He felt a sickening tearing sensation below his eyes as two new eyelids ripped themselves into existence. They snapped open, revealing a second pair of blood-red irises that glowed with predatory, ancient intelligence. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was a vessel. A cage that had just had its lock broken. And something else, something ancient and terrible, was looking out through his eyes. A voice, not his own, echoed in the depths of his consciousness. It was deep, resonant, and dripping with arrogant amusement. Ah! The taste of the outside world after 1,000 years. And what a pathetic vessel I find myself in. Still, it will have to do. From the outside, the transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. Katsuki Bakugo, his vision blurring from oxygen deprivation, saw Deku fall. He saw the pathetic nerd scoop something off the ground and shove it in his mouth. What is that idiot doing? Eating trash? Then, the pressure wave hit him. It was a physical force, a wall of pure killing intent that was so potent it made the sludge villain's murderous aura feel like a gentle spring breeze. He saw Deku. No, not Deku. Get back to his feet. The boy's posture was different. He stood with an easy, arrogant slouch, his head tilted. The black markings covering his body seemed to writhe like living things. And those eyes, those 4 glowing eyes. They weren't the eyes of the crying, hero-worshipping kid he had known his whole life. They were the eyes of a predator, a king looking down upon insects. The sludge villain recoiled, a primitive fear coursing through its semi-sentient form. It sensed a power that dwarfed its own, an apex predator in a world of sheep. It tried to tighten its grip on Bakugo, to use him as a shield, but it was too late. The creature wearing Izuku's skin raised a single hand, its fingers relaxed. It didn't speak a word. It just watched. Bakugo felt a strange sensation, like a single, impossibly thin wire being drawn through the air. There was no sound, no flash of light, no visible projectile. There was only a result. The sludge villain simply fell apart. It was bisected. A perfect, clean cut ran vertically through its entire body. The two halves of the slimy monster slid away from each other, releasing Bakugo, who collapsed to the ground, coughing and gagging for air. The cut was so precise, so unnaturally clean, that not a single drop of the villain's disgusting fluid had touched him. It was as if the very space the villain had occupied had been neatly and effortlessly cleaved in two. The two halves of the villain quivered on the ground, unable to reform across the invisible line that had been drawn through them. The threat was neutralized. Just like that. On the sidelines, the heroes and the crowd were frozen in a state of collective shock. They hadn't seen an attack. One moment, the boy was on the ground, about to be killed. The next, a wave of dark energy exploded from him, and the villain was in pieces. All Might, still in his weakened form, felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with his injury. He had felt that energy. It wasn't a quirk. Quirks were a biological function, an extension of the self. This was something else entirely. It was parasitic. It was ancient. It was wrong. It was a cursed power, an energy that felt like it existed purely for destruction and malice. The boy, the monster, stood over Bakugo's coughing form. One of its hands twitched, and for a terrifying second, All Might was certain it was going to kill the blonde teenager next. But then, the creature wavered. The black markings flickered like a dying candle. The second pair of eyes squeezed shut and began to fade, sinking back into the skin as if they had never been there. The arrogant, predatory posture slackened. The immense pressure that had saturated the air vanished in an instant. Izuku Midoriya, his face now clean of the sinister tattoos, his own wide, terrified green eyes the only ones on his face, swayed on his feet. He looked down at his trembling hands, then at the defeated villain, and then at Bakugo. A look of profound confusion and horror crossed his face. "Keikaken," he whispered, his voice weak and hoarse, and then, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he crumpled to the ground in a dead faint. Silence. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the alley. The only sounds were the crackle of distant fires and Bakugo's ragged breathing. The crowd was mute, their phones lowered. The heroes stood like statues, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Death Arms was the first to move. What in the hell was that? He breathed, taking a cautious step forward. Was that the kid's quirk? Some kind of late-stage manifestation? No quirk I've ever seen does that, Kamui Woods added, his wooden arm trembling slightly. The readings would be off the charts. Our sensors didn't even pick up an energy signature for the attack. They approached Izuku's unconscious form cautiously, as if he were an unexploded bomb. Bakugo, now sitting up, stared at the fallen nerd, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling of being completely and utterly surpassed. Deku, useless, quirkless Deku, had just saved him with a power more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. It didn't make sense. The paramedics rushed in, their initial assessment finding Izuku to be completely unharmed, aside from a few scrapes from his fall. His vitals were stable, if a little erratic. There was no sign of the monstrous power he had just displayed. To them, he was just a kid who had fainted from shock. All Might watched from the shadows of the crowd, his heart pounding in his shrunken chest. He saw it. He saw the truth the others missed. The boy hadn't just awakened a quirk. He had ingested something that had turned him, however briefly, into a host for a power that defied all modern understanding of abilities. He had told the boy he couldn't be a hero. He had crushed his spirit with cold, hard realism. And that desperation, a desperation he had personally fueled, had driven the boy to do something unthinkable, to take a gamble on a cursed artifact he found in the dirt. As the ambulance crew loaded Izuku onto a stretcher, one of the paramedics noticed the two bisected halves of the sludge villain. He knelt, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Hey, look at this," he called to a nearby hero. "The cut, it's perfectly smooth. Not torn or blasted. It's like it was cut by a laser, but there are no burn marks." All Might's gaze hardened. A laser was a tool of science. What he had witnessed was something closer to black magic. He had a choice. He could walk away, leave this anomaly to the authorities, and continue his search for a worthy, stable successor for One for All. It would be the safe, logical thing to do, the realistic thing to do, But as the ambulance doors closed, sealing the unconscious boy inside, All Might saw a faint flicker of Izuku's green hair before he was hidden from view. He saw the boy who had run into danger without a quirk, without a plan, driven by nothing more than the pure, heroic instinct to save someone. He saw the boy whose dreams he had personally extinguished, forcing him into a desperate act with catastrophic potential. This is my fault, he thought again, the words tasting like ash. My responsibility. He had told Izuku Midoriya he couldn't be a hero. He was beginning to think he had never been more wrong in his life. The boy had the heart of a true hero. But now, he also possessed the power of a demon. It was a combination that could either save the world or shatter it into a million pieces. As the siren wailed and the ambulance pulled away, Toshinori Yagi made a decision. His search for a successor was over. His new mission had just begun. He had to understand what happened to that boy. He had to reach him, to guide him. He had to ensure that the soul of the hero, Izuku Midoriya, would not be consumed by the curse he had swallowed in a moment of desperate, tragic hope. He had to be there when the boy woke up, to help him face the king of curses now living inside his soul. Darkness. Then, not darkness, but a profound and absolute nothing. It was a void without temperature, without pressure, without even the concept of space. Izuku Midoriya existed as a disembodied point of consciousness, adrift in an endless, silent sea of non-existence. The memory of the alley, the sludge, Kaken's terrified eyes, and the vile, gritty taste of the finger were a fading dream, its edges frayed by this overwhelming emptiness. He tried to call out, but he had no mouth. He tried to move, but he had no limbs. There was only the thought, the eye, and it was beginning to dissolve. Then a sound. A slow, rhythmic dripping. Plink. Plunk. Plink. With the sound came sensation. A cold, hard surface beneath him. He could feel it now, the unyielding pressure of stone against the back he suddenly possessed. He blinked eyes he hadn't realized were closed, and the void was replaced by a sky the color of dried blood. It wasn't a sky of clouds and sun, but a flat, oppressive ceiling of crimson that stretched to an unseen horizon, pulsating with a faint, sickly light. He sat up, his movements sluggish, his body feeling both alien and familiar. He was in a vast open space. The ground beneath him wasn't just stone. It was a shallow basin filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He dipped his fingers into it. It was warm, thick, and smelled faintly of rust. Blood. He was sitting in an ankle-deep ocean of blood. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize him, but it was muted, as if his emotions were struggling to find purchase in this unreal place. His gaze lifted from the sanguine sea and fixed on the impossible structure that dominated the landscape. It was a mountain. A mountain made of bones, skulls, femurs, ribs, and vertebrae of creatures both human and monstrous were piled hundreds of feet into the air, a macabre monument to an eon of slaughter. At its zenith, built from the largest and most terrifying of these remains, the ribcage of some colossal beast forming its backrest, sat a throne, and on that throne, someone was lounging. The figure was unmistakably male, exuding an aura of such profound arrogance and power that it felt like a physical weight on Izuku's shoulders. He was shirtless, his pale torso covered in the same intricate black markings that had briefly scarred Izuku's own skin. Two powerful arms rested on the bone armrests, but two more, equally defined, were crossed behind his head as he leaned back, a picture of casual, regal boredom. His spiky, light-colored hair was swept back from a face that was both handsome and terrifying. His eyes were closed, but Izuku felt an unnerving certainty that they were red. This had to be a dream. A nightmare brought on by the stress and trauma of the villain attack. That was the only logical explanation. So the little worm finally awakens. A voice drawled, echoing in the vast emptiness. It was deep, laced with a lazy contempt, and it vibrated not in the air, but directly inside Izuku's skull. The man on the throne didn't move, his eyes remaining closed. Who are you? Izuku stammered, his voice small and thin in the oppressive silence. Where am I? A low chuckle, devoid of any warmth, was his only answer for a moment. Then, one pair of eyes, the upper pair, snapped open. They were exactly as Izuku had imagined, blood-red, with slitted pupils like a cat, glowing with ancient, predatory intelligence. They pinned Izuku in place more effectively than any physical restraint. "You are in my soul. My innate domain," the man said, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "And as for who I am the one you so foolishly consumed. A rather desperate meal, I must say. I've been called many things over the centuries. A demon god. A walking calamity. The disgraced one." He sat up straighter, all four of his eyes now open and fixed on Izuku. The sheer force of his presence was suffocating. "But you, my fortunate little vessel, may call me Ryaman Sukuna. The king of curses." Izuku's mind reeled. Curses? King? Vessel? This wasn't a villain with a quirk. This was something else, something that didn't fit into any of his notebooks, into any corner of his carefully ordered world. This isn't real," Izuku insisted, scrambling backward, the blood sloshing around his ankles. "You're a hallucination. My mind is it's trying to cope with what happened." Sukuna laughed, a full-throated, booming sound of genuine amusement. "Oh, you are a fascinatingly pathetic creature. You ingest a piece of my very being, a cursed object of the highest grade, and you think this is a simple trick of the mind?" He leaned forward, resting his chin on a steepled set of hands. "Let me simplify it for your minuscule brain, boy. I am a cursed spirit. An entity born from the negative emotions of humanity. And not just any spirit. I am the apex. The strongest." He gestured with one of his lower hands to the bone throne and the sanguine sea. "This world, this soul, it is mine. But your body, your pathetic, quirkless little body, is now my cage. A cage from which I can see and feel the outside world for the first time in 1,000 years. You are my link, my vessel." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The finger. That grotesque, mummified finger he had swallowed in his moment of insane desperation. It wasn't a quirk booster. It was a prison fragment, and he had just swallowed the prisoner. "So that power, the thing that defeated the villain," Izuku whispered, his body trembling. "That was you, a mere fraction of my power." Sukuna corrected him, waving a dismissive hand. "A sliver of my cursed energy. A simple application of my technique. You should be grateful. Your miserable life was about to be snuffed out. I saved you. And your explosive little friend." The mention of Kaken sent a jolt through Izuku. "You could have killed him! You could have killed everyone, and I still might," Sukuna said with a yawn, stretching his forearms wide. "Do not mistake my actions for benevolence. The villain was an eyesore, and your sniveling was annoying. That is all. Your world of heroes and villains is a childish game to me. There are only two things that matter, the strong and the weak. The pleasured and the displeased. I do as I please, and you, brat, are now inextricably tied to my pleasure." Izuku felt a surge of defiant anger, a tiny flame in the face of an inferno. "No! I won't let you! I'll get you out of me! A hero will find a way!" Sukuna's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, sharp annoyance. In an instant he was gone from the throne. Izuku felt a gust of wind, and suddenly the king of curses was standing directly in front of him, looming over his trembling form. The proximity was terrifying. The aura of malice he exuded was a physical poison, making Izuku's lungs burn and his eyes water. "You are in no position to make demands," Sukuna hissed, his four red eyes boring into Izuku's soul. He reached out with one hand, his long, black nails stopping a millimeter from Izuku's throat. "Know your place. This body is mine to use. The only reason you are still you is because your soul, as pathetic as it is, has some unusual resistance. You are a cage, yes, but a surprisingly sturdy one. For now." He straightened up, his predatory smile returning. "But do not fret. We are bound. Your life is now mine. If you die, I die. And I have no intention of dying again. This is a partnership of a sort. You keep us alive, and I will enjoy the show." With a flick of his wrist, Sukuna sent Izuku flying backward. He tumbled through the sea of blood, his head hitting the cold stone with a sickening crack. The world of crimson and bone began to dissolve, swirling into a vortex of darkness. The last thing he heard was Sukuna's mocking laughter. Enjoy reality, brat. It's about to become far more interesting. A persistent, high-pitched beeping dragged Izuku from the crimson nightmare. The smell of antiseptic replaced the scent of old blood. A soft, lumpy surface was beneath his head instead of cold stone. He groaned, his entire body aching as if he'd gone 10 rounds with All Might himself. He cracked his eyes open. The world was blindingly, painfully bright. He was in a hospital room, the sterile white walls and fluorescent lights an almost violent contrast to the domain of his mind. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him, its green line a comforting sign of life. Izuku? Oh, Izuku, you're awake! His mother's voice, thick with tears, cut through the haze. Inko Midoriya was sitting in a chair by his bed, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, her face a mask of profound relief and anxiety. She lunged forward, wrapping him in a gentle but desperate hug. Mom! He croaked, his throat dry. What happened? You fainted, sweetie, she said, pulling back to look at him, her hands fluttering over his face as if to check if he was real. At the villain attack. The doctor said it was shock and exhaustion. Oh, I was so worried. The police told me what you did, running in like that. It was so reckless, so brave, but so reckless. He saw the conflict in her eyes, pride and terror warring for dominance. But as he looked at her, something felt different. It wasn't just the relief of waking up. His perception of the world had fundamentally shifted. The light from the overhead fixture wasn't just a uniform glow. He could see the individual frequencies, the pulse of electricity flowing through the tube, a faint nimbus of energy swirling around it that he had no name for. He could see the dust motes dancing in the air, not as random specks, but as individual particles, each with its own trajectory. He looked at his mother, and he saw more than just her worried expression. He could see the faint heat signature rising from her skin, the subtle twitch of every muscle in her face, the pattern of her blood vessels beneath her pale skin. It was an overwhelming, dizzying flood of information. He brought a trembling hand up to his face. His eyes. Something was different about his eyes. He fumbled for his phone on the bedside table, his fingers clumsy. He turned on the camera and switched it to selfie mode. The face that stared back was his, but the eyes were not. Gone were his familiar, plain green irises. In their place were 2 pools of brilliant, crystalline blue. They were the color of a summer sky, of a glacial crevasse, so bright they seemed to glow with their own internal light. They were piercing, analytical, and utterly alien. My eyes, he whispered. Inko leaned in, her brow furrowed. Oh, the doctor said that can happen sometimes. Stress-induced heterochromia or something. He said it might be temporary. They're very beautiful, Izuku. She tried for a reassuring smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's not stress, Izuku thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. It's him. It's a side effect. Something has changed in me. A knock on the door preceded a doctor and a pair of detectives entering the room. The doctor, a kind-faced man in his 50s, gave Izuku a warm smile. Ah, good to see you're awake, young man. You gave us all quite a scare. He checked the monitor and made a few notes on a chart. Vitals are perfect. Physically, you're fine, save for a few scrapes, though we are baffled by the sudden change in your eye color. One of the detectives, a tall man in a trench coat named Sakachi, stepped forward. Midoriya-kun, we need to ask you a few questions about the incident. We understand this is difficult, but your testimony is important. Izuku nodded numbly. He knew what they were going to ask. What did you see? What did you do? How could he possibly explain? Sakachi's questioning was gentle but firm. They had the official report. A villain with a fluid body quirk took a hostage. During the standoff, a large-scale gas main in the alleyway ruptured, causing a concussive explosion that incapacitated the villain. Izuku, they theorized, must have had a latent quirk, some form of concussive force or energy manipulation, that awakened under extreme stress and triggered the explosion. It was a neat, logical lie. It explained the destroyed alley, the defeated villain, and his sudden collapse. Is that what happened, son? Sakachi asked, his eyes searching Izuku's. Did you feel a surge of power? A quirk awakening? Izuku looked at his mother's hopeful face, then at the detective's expectant one. The truth was an impossibility, A one-way ticket to a psychiatric ward or a secret government laboratory. Sakuna's voice echoed in his memory. Your world of heroes and villains is a childish game to me. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't. I don't know. Izuku lied, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. It all happened so fast. I threw my bag, and then there was a loud noise, and a bright light. Everything after that is a blur. Tsukachi sighed, but he seemed to accept it. It was a common enough response from traumatized victims. They finished their questions and left, promising to be in touch. Later that day, after his mother had gone to the cafeteria to get some tea, he had another visitor. It was a skeletal, almost ghoulishly thin man with sunken eyes and a shock of blonde hair. He wore a baggy white t-shirt and cargo pants several sizes too large. It took Izuku a moment to place him. It was All Might, young Midoriya. Tashinori Yagi said, his voice a low rumble. He closed the door quietly behind him. I am glad to see you are all right. Izuku stared, speechless. The number one hero, in his weakened form, was standing in his hospital room. All Might, please call me Yagi here, he said, pulling the chair closer to the bed. He looked tired, older than he had on the rooftop. And he looked guilty. I came here to apologize. And to thank you? Izuku blinked. Apologize? For what? For what I said on the rooftop, Yagi said, his gaze unwavering. I told you to be realistic. I extinguished the fire in your heart. I was projecting my own limitations, my own fears onto you, and in doing so, I left you in a state of desperation. A state that led you to do what you did in that alley. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knows. I don't know what you mean, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. Don't you? Yagi leaned forward. I was there, my boy. I saw it all. I saw you run in when no one else would. You possessed more heroism in your quirkless body than all the heroes standing on the sidelines, and I saw what happened after. That was not a gas explosion. And it was not a normal quirk awakening. He gestured to Izuku's brilliant blue eyes. Those are proof of that. Izuku couldn't speak. The secret was too immense, too terrifying to share. Yagi seemed to understand. You don't have to tell me everything right now. But I want you to know this. What I saw was a power of incredible, terrifying potential. A power that could be used for great good, or for unspeakable evil. And I saw a boy with the heart of a true hero suddenly burdened with it. He placed a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. It was surprisingly warm. I was wrong. You can be a hero. In fact, you already are. But you are walking a path that no one has ever walked before. It will be a lonely and dangerous one. And I want you to know, you do not have to walk it alone. Tears welled in Izuku's new blue eyes. The validation, the acceptance from his idol, was a balm on his fractured soul. He still couldn't bring himself to speak of the king of curses living in his mind. But for the first time since that fateful gulp, he felt a flicker of something other than terror. He felt a sliver of hope. Being discharged from the hospital felt like stepping onto an alien planet. The world was too loud, too bright, too much. The six eyes, as Sakuna had derisively called them in a fleeting thought that wasn't Izuku's own, were a constant, unrelenting torrent of information. He could see the stress fractures in the pavement, the faint trails of energy left by cars, the swirling miasmas of negative emotion clinging to people in the street like cheap perfume. It was giving him a pounding headache that no amount of painkillers could touch. The walk home was a trial. His mother tried to make cheerful conversation, but Izuku could only offer mumbled replies, his focus entirely consumed by the monumental task of simply processing the world around him. Pathetic, a voice sneered in his head. It was Sukuna, his tone dripping with disdain. Overwhelmed by a simple sensory input. That inherited trash in your eyes is wasted on you. Go away, Izuku thought, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment. This is my home now too, brat. I go where you go. I see what you see. And I must say, the view is dreadfully boring. When they finally reached their apartment, the familiar scent of home did little to soothe him. It felt like a stage, a set for a life that no longer belonged to him. Inko, trying to restore some semblance of normalcy, immediately started bustling around the kitchen, preparing his favorite, katsudon. "You just sit down and rest, sweetie," she said, her smile a little too bright. "I'll have dinner ready in a jiffy." Izuku sat at the small kitchen table, burying his face in his hands, trying to block out the sensory overload. The hum of the refrigerator was a roaring engine. The ticking of the clock was a series of gunshots. "Your mother is trying so hard," Sakuna mused, his voice a venomous whisper in Izuku's mind. "She senses something is wrong. She's afraid. Can you feel it? Her fear is like a sweet little morsel of cursed energy." "Shut up," Izuku pleaded internally. "Just leave me alone." "But why would I do that? I'm the most interesting thing about you." "Izuku?" His mother's voice cut through the internal conflict. He looked up, startled. She was standing by the counter, holding a glass of water, her face etched with concern. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a headache." His sudden movement, his flinch of surprise, was just enough to startle her. Her hand jerked, and the glass slipped from her grasp. Time seemed to warp. For Izuku, the world slowed to a crawl. His 6 eyes tracked the glass's descent with impossible precision. He saw the arc of its fall, calculated its velocity, saw the exact spot on the tiled floor where it would shatter. Instinct, an instinct he didn't know he possessed, took over. He shot his hand out, not to catch it, but to block it. He wasn't fast enough. A normal person would never have been fast enough. But as the glass neared his outstretched palm, a strange phenomenon occurred. It began to slow down, its velocity decreasing exponentially the closer it got to his skin. 1 inch away, half an inch, a quarter of an inch. It stopped, suspended in midair, a mere millimeter from his palm, vibrating almost imperceptibly. It hung there, defying gravity, held in place by a force that was neither visible nor tangible. Izuku stared, his jaw slack. He could feel it. It was like a barrier, an invisible wall that surrounded his body. The glass hadn't been stopped by his hand. It had been stopped by the space in front of his hand. He could perceive it with his new eyes. The space between the glass and his skin was being infinitely subdivided. The glass was perpetually crossing a halfway point, but never reaching its destination. The Achilles and the tortoise paradox, made real. This was his power. Not Sakuna's. His. Humph. The limitless, Sakuna's voice grumbled in his head, full of sour annoyance. An old, troublesome technique passed down through a clan of insufferable sorcerers. To think it would manifest in a sniveling brat like you. A pearl cast before swine. Inko stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hands still outstretched. She stared at the glass, floating impossibly in the air before her son's hand. The shock of the moment, the sheer impossibility of it, broke Izuku's concentration. The invisible barrier flickered and died. Gravity reasserted its authority, and the glass completed the last millimeter of its journey, clattering harmlessly into his waiting palm. He looked at the glass, then at his hand, then at his mother's stunned face. The headache was gone, replaced by a chilling, terrifying clarity. He wasn't just a cage for a demon. He had awakened something else, a power just as immense, just as alien, that was uniquely his own. He now had 2 voices in his head. One was the ancient, malevolent king of curses, offering power through destruction and malice. The other was a silent, instinctive whisper of absolute control, the ability to warp the very fabric of reality. He was trapped between them. A monster inside him, and a godlike power he couldn't hope to control. He looked at his mother's frightened expression, and the weight of his new reality came crashing down. All might had told him he could be a hero, but as he stood in his quiet kitchen, holding a simple glass of water that had just violated the laws of physics, Izuku Midoriya had never felt more like a monster in his entire life. And he was utterly, completely alone. The 2 weeks following his discharge from the hospital were a private, personalized hell. Izuku's world had been permanently distorted, viewed through a new, hyper-efficient lens he couldn't turn off. The 6 eyes were a relentless engine of information, and his brain was the failing computer struggling to process it all. At school, the mundane drone of the teachers became a complex symphony of wasted breaths, heart rate fluctuations, and the subtle energy signatures of their quirks lying dormant beneath their skin. The other students were walking data streams of anxiety, boredom, and hormonal spikes. He had to wear sunglasses indoors just to dull the visual input, to stop himself from seeing the atomic structure of the chalk dust dancing in the sunbeams. Sleep offered little respite. He would either dream of the bone throne and the sanguine sea, with Sakuna's mocking laughter as a constant soundtrack, or he would be jolted awake by the infinity unconsciously activating, pushing his blankets a millimeter away from his skin and leaving him shivering in a pocket of unnaturally still air. He felt like a live wire, a single touch away from shorting out the entire city block. His mother, bless her heart, tried her best. She tiptoed around him, her love and fear a palpable aura he could almost see swirling around her. The incident with the floating glass had created a chasm between them, an unspoken truth that hung in the air. He was different now. He was dangerous. He saw the way her hand would sometimes tremble when she handed him a bowl of rice, and the guilt was a physical ache in his chest. "She's afraid of you, brat," Sakuna would whisper in the quiet moments, his voice a silken thread of poison in Izuku's mind. And she should be. One wrong move, one moment of lost control, and you could erase her from existence. Wouldn't that be interesting to see? Izuku would grit his teeth and retreat to his room, burying his head under his pillow, trying to drown out the voice of the demon he had swallowed. It was during one of these moments, curled in a ball of sensory overload and self-loathing, that his phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, with a groan, he pulled it out. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated, then answered. Hello, young Midoriya. The voice was deep, familiar, yet thin and reedy without the booming echo of his hero persona. It was All Might. Meet me tomorrow at sunrise. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Come alone. The line went dead before Izuku could even reply. The next morning, Izuku crept out of the apartment before his mother was awake, leaving a short, vague note on the table. The pre-dawn air was cool and crisp, but it did little to calm the frantic hummingbird of his heart. As he approached the coastline, the scent of salt and sea was overcome by the foul stench of decay and rust. Dagoba Beach was less a beach and more a landfill that had lost a war with the ocean. For years, illegal dumping and ocean currents had conspired to turn this once scenic stretch of sand into a mountain range of garbage. Piles of rusted appliances, heaps of discarded furniture, and mountains of plastic waste were stacked 10, sometimes 20 feet high, creating a jagged, ugly skyline against the rising sun. To Izuku's 6 eyes, it was a breathtaking catastrophe. He could see the residual energy signatures of every discarded object, the lingering warmth in a broken television, the faint echo of a quirk in a discarded hero-themed toy, the slow, inexorable decay of it all. It was a graveyard of potential, a monument to neglect. A hacking cough cut through the morning silence. Izuku turned to see the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi leaning against a veritable wall of old tires, a handkerchief pressed to his lips. "Glad you could make it, my boy," he said, his voice raspy. He straightened up, his towering height made less intimidating by his emaciated frame. "Quite the sight, isn't it? A perfect symbol of how society often neglects the things it deems broken or useless." Izuku didn't miss the subtle parallel. He felt like one of these broken things. "All Might, why did you ask me to come here?" Izuku asked, his voice barely audible over the cry of the gulls. Toshinori's expression was grim, the usual heroic smile completely absent. "We need to talk. About your future. About that power. First things first," he said, his gaze firm. "I want to make something clear. My offer to make you my successor, to pass on my quirk, one for all, that is no longer possible." The words, which would have shattered Izuku's world just 2 weeks ago, now landed with a dull thud. He had already suspected as much. I understand," Izuku said, looking down at his own hands. "I don't think you do," Toshinori corrected him gently. "This isn't a punishment. It is a precaution. One for all is a sacred torch, a stockpile of immense power. Your body, your soul, it is already a vessel for 2 conflicting, overwhelming forces. To add a third would be like trying to cram another sun into an already volatile solar system. It wouldn't empower you. It would destroy you. It would rip you apart from the inside out." He took a step closer, his sunken eyes filled with a heavy, paternal concern. "I failed you on that rooftop, young Midoriya. My realism, my weariness, it pushed you into a corner, and you responded by grabbing the first, most dangerous thing you could find. I am responsible for the burden you now carry. Therefore, it is my duty to help you bear it. Izuku looked up, his bright blue eyes wide with a fragile, burgeoning hope. The UA entrance exam is in 10 months. Tashinori continued, gesturing to the junkyard around them. It is the greatest hero academy in the world. But you can't walk in there as you are now. You are unstable. That power inside you is a wild animal, and right now, it is the one holding the leash. If you want to be a hero, if you truly want to save people, you first need to learn absolute control. You need to prove, to them and to yourself, that you are the master of your own power. A flicker of a smile, the first genuine one Izuku had seen from the man, touched Tashinori's lips. So, our training begins today. My plan is simple. It will strengthen your body, hone your mind, and teach you control. Your task for the next 10 months, young Midoriya, is to clean this entire beach. Izuku stared at the mountains of garbage, then back at the skeletal hero. It was an impossible task. There were tons, perhaps thousands of tons, of trash. But how? With your power, of course, Tashinori said, a glint in his eye. But not the one you think. Not the dark power you consumed. We will not be touching that one unless absolutely necessary. We will focus on the other ability. The one that made that glass float. The inherited one. The limitless, Sakuna's voice supplied from the back of his mind, dripping with boredom. How droll. I don't know how to use it, Izuku admitted. It just happens. Then we will make it happen on command, Tashinori declared. His demeanor shifted, the weary man replaced by the seasoned mentor. He picked up a small, rusted microwave from a nearby pile. Your first lesson, mastering your defense. The infinity, as you called it. The ability to stop anything from reaching you. Right now, it's an unconscious reflex. We need to make it a conscious, selective tool. He hefted the microwave. I'm going to throw this at you. Izuku's eyes widened. What? Don't let it hit you, All Might said simply. And with a grunt of effort he hurled the appliance through the air. It tumbled end over end, a block of rusted metal aimed directly at Izuku's face. Panic flared in his chest. He didn't think, he just reacted, diving to the side with a clumsy roll. The microwave crashed into the sand where he had been standing, sending up a spray of grit and filth. Pathetic, Tashinori said, his voice hard. You dodged. The goal is not to dodge. The goal is to be untouchable. Again, he picked up a car tire and flung it like a frisbee. Again, Izuku scrambled out of the way, his heart pounding. This continued for the better part of an hour. All Might would throw something, a toaster, a broken chair, a hubcap, and Izuku would dive, roll, or stumble away, earning a grunt of disapproval each time. He was getting tired, his body screaming in protest, but the barrier refused to manifest on command. It only seemed to work when he was genuinely surprised, like with the falling glass. You look like a frightened rabbit, Sukuna scoffed in his head. Just let me out for a second. I would turn this entire garbage heap, and that talking skeleton, into fine dust. Problem solved. No! Izuku gasped aloud, stumbling to his feet. No what, my boy? Tashinori asked, holding a barnacle-encrusted television. Nothing! I'm ready, Izuku lied, panting. Your focus is split, Tashinori observed, his gaze sharp. You're fighting a battle on two fronts, aren't you? In your head, Izuku froze. All Might couldn't hear Sukuna, but he could see the effects. He could see the strain on Izuku's face, the way his eyes would dart to an empty spot, the beads of sweat on his brow that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He is a distraction, Tashinori said. A temptation. That is his weapon. You must learn to treat him like the junk on this beach. Background noise. A problem to be dealt with, but not one that can be allowed to control your actions. Focus, young Midoriya. Focus on me. On the threat. On your own power. He hurled the television. This time, Izuku stood his ground. He squeezed his eyes shut and braced for impact, trying to will the barrier into existence. He imagined a wall of steel, a force field, anything. The television shattered against his forehead, or at least that's what it felt like. He was knocked backward, collapsing onto the sand with a cry of pain, seeing stars. He sat up, a large, throbbing lump already forming. Ha 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 ha. Sakuna's laughter was a roar of pure, unadulterated delight in his mind. Priceless. To be felled by a primitive cathode ray tube. The wielder of the 6 eyes and the limitless, defeated by trash. This is the most entertainment I've had in centuries. You tried to force it, Toshinori said, his voice softer now, tinged with concern as he helped Izuku up. This power, from what I can observe, isn't about strength of will. It's about perception. Your eyes, they see everything, don't they? More than a normal person, Izuku nodded, rubbing his head. Too much. Then don't try to block everything. Just block the projectile. See it. Isolate it. And let your power do the rest, Toshinori advised. Let's try something smaller. He picked up a bottle cap from the sand, pinching it between his thumb and forefinger. Ready? Before Izuku could answer, Toshinori flicked it. It was impossibly fast, a tiny black speck cutting through the air. There was no time to dodge, no time to even think about bracing for impact. There was only time to see. His 6 eyes, for the first time, worked in concert with his conscious mind. He saw the bottle cap not as a solid object, but as a collection of atoms moving through space. He tracked its arc, its spin, its velocity. He perceived the air it displaced, the kinetic energy it carried. It was a hostile variable in the equation of his immediate surroundings. He saw it, he recognized it as a threat, and the infinity responded. Plink. The sound was tiny. The bottle cap stopped dead an inch from his nose, suspended in the air as if it had hit a pane of invisible glass. Then it dropped harmlessly to the sand. Izuku stared at the spot where it had stopped, his breath hitched in his throat. He hadn't forced it. He hadn't even tried. He had simply observed. There, Toshinori said, a proud smile finally breaking through his grim facade. You see? It is an extension of your perception. A perfect, automatic defense. Now let's see if you can do it again. That was the breakthrough. For the rest of the day they worked. All might through progressively larger and faster objects, and Izuku learned to stand his ground. He learned to trust his eyes, to trust the silent, automatic power that sprang to his defense. He learned to filter reality. At first, it was a clumsy, all-or-nothing shield. He would accidentally block the wind, creating a pocket of dead air around himself. He even blocked the sunlight for a moment, his personal space plunging into a strange, localized shadow. But with practice, guided by the constant stream of data from his 6 eyes, he began to refine it. He learned to set the parameters, to allow harmless things like air and light to pass through while selectively targeting anything with sufficient mass and velocity to be a threat. By the end of the day, as the sun began to set, he could stand perfectly still while a barrage of junk thrown by all might would stop millimeters from his body, forming a strange, orbiting halo of garbage before clattering to the ground. He was exhausted, bruised, and covered in filth, but he was, for the first time, in control. The months bled into one another. Every morning at dawn, Izuku would meet Toshinori at the beach. His physical training was grueling. He hauled massive pieces of trash, his once scrawny muscles slowly hardening into lean, defined cords of strength. But the true training was in his quirk, or what they called his quirk for simplicity's sake. The infinity barrier became second nature, a passive field he could keep active at all times with minimal concentration. The headaches began to fade as his brain adapted to the 6 eyes, learning to filter the deluge of information into a usable stream rather than a chaotic flood. Sakuna's taunts were still there, a constant, venomous background hum, but Izuku learned to build walls in his own mind, to treat the king of curses as little more than a particularly nasty case of tinnitus. It was about 6 months into the training that the next phase of his power revealed itself, once again by complete accident. The task for the day was to move a mountain of particularly heavy debris, a collection of rusted refrigerators, washing machines, and engine blocks, from one side of a cove to the other. His body ached, and his progress was agonizingly slow. Come on, young Midoriya! Put your back into it! Toshinori called from his perch atop a pile of scrap metal. I'm trying! Izuku grunted, his feet sinking into the sand as he tried to push a massive, commercial-grade refrigerator. It wouldn't budge. Frustration, hot and sharp, flared within him. It was just so inefficient. He didn't want to push it there. He wanted it to be there. He stared at the empty spot on the other side of the cove where the pile was supposed to go, his focus narrowing. He pictured the refrigerator in that spot, imagined it being pulled, drawn toward its destination. If I can stop things from reaching me, he thought, a strange, intuitive leap of logic forming in his mind, can I make things come to me? Stopping is just manipulating the space between. What if I compress the space? He reached out a hand, not toward the refrigerator itself, but toward the space just in front of it. He focused, channeling his energy, his perception, his intent. He tried to create a focal point, a void, a negative. The air in front of the refrigerator shimmered, distorting like a heat haze. A low hum filled the air, the sound of a powerful vacuum cleaner starting up. A tiny speck of light, no bigger than a pinprick, materialized in the distorted space. It was a brilliant, pulsating blue. Lapse blue, the refrigerator groaned. Not with the sound of being pushed, but with the tortured screech of metal being pulled by an incredible, irresistible force. It tilted, then lurched forward, scraping a deep furrow in the sand as it was dragged toward the blue light. The light intensified, the hum growing into a roar. With a final, deafening crash, the refrigerator slammed into a pile of other junk near the target destination, crushing a washing machine flat. The blue light winked out of existence, and silence returned. Izuku stood panting, his arms still outstretched, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Toshinori leaped down from his perch, his own eyes wide. What, in the name of, what was that? I don't know, Izuku stammered, looking at his hand. His 6 eyes, however, were already providing the answer. It was a flood of complex physics and energy dynamics that he understood on a purely intuitive level. I didn't pull the fridge. I pulled the space in front of it. I created a convergence, a point of negative infinity. And the world rushed in to correct it. Clumsy, but effective, Sakuna's voice remarked, a rare note of grudging approval in his tone. You're finally starting to think with your true potential instead of just your muscles. Took you long enough. The discovery of blue revolutionized his cleanup effort. He could now move tons of garbage with a flick of his wrist, pulling vast sections of the junkyard into consolidated piles. But it was a dangerous, volatile power. A moment of lost concentration and the pull would become too strong, crushing objects into unrecognizable lumps of scrap. A week later, he discovered its counterpart. He was trying to clear a particularly stubborn pile of debris wedged between 2 large rock formations. Using blue was too risky. He might bring the rocks down on top of himself. I need to push it out, he muttered to himself. Not pull it in. If I can create a negative, the same strange logic from before whispered, can I create a positive? Not a convergence, but a divergence? He remembered the feeling of creating blue, the inward pull, the compression of space. He tried to do the opposite. To amplify, to expand, to reverse the flow of energy. He held up his hand and focused on a single point on his fingertip, pouring his power into it, forcing it outward. A spark of crimson light, intense and angry, appeared on his finger. It crackled with energy, and the air around it grew intensely hot. Reversal, red. Toshinori, who had been observing from a safe distance, sensed the shift in energy. Young Midoriya, wait! Be careful! But the warning came too late. Izuku released the energy. It wasn't a pull or a push. It was an explosion. A silent, concussive blast of pure force erupted from his fingertip. The sound barrier was shattered with a deafening crack boom that echoed across the water. The entire pile of wedged debris was vaporized, blasted outward with twice the force he had put in. Sand was glassed, and the rock formations on either side were scored with deep, cauterized gashes. The shockwave knocked Izuku off his feet and sent Toshinori tumbling. Izuku sat up, his ears ringing, staring at the smoking crater where the junk had been. The sheer, unrestrained destructive power was horrifying. It was far, far more potent than blue. My boy! Toshinori said, his voice grave as he picked himself up. He looked at the devastation, then back at his student. The fear in his eyes was palpable. Do you understand now? This is the power you wield, not the power to punch villains. The power to level cities. This is why you must learn control. There is no room for error. The final months of training were a study in precision. Izuku learned to use blue to pluck a single bottle from a pile of 100, and to use red to gently nudge a heavy object instead of obliterating it. The beach slowly but surely began to reappear from under its blanket of trash. The sand, once gray and grimy, began to show its natural pale color. The ocean breeze no longer carried the stench of rust. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, Izuku stood with Toshinori on the shoreline. The beach was immaculate. Every last piece of trash was gone, neatly sorted and piled high on the road for the city's sanitation department to collect. The rising sun cast a golden glow across the clean sand and the sparkling blue water. It was a place reborn. Izuku's body was different, too. The 10 months of grueling labor had stripped away the baby fat, replacing it with hard, lean muscle. He stood taller, his posture confident, but the most significant change was in his eyes. The brilliant, glowing blue was still there, but the panic and confusion were gone, replaced by a calm, quiet resolve. You did it, my boy, Toshinori said, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked out at the transformed landscape. You did the impossible. I had a good teacher, Izuku replied, a small smile on his face. Toshinori's expression turned serious. Now, the real test begins. Why do you want to go to UA, young Midoriya? After everything you've learned, everything you can do, why? Izuku looked out at the ocean, his gaze distant. The boy who had met All Might on that rooftop a year ago would have spouted a dozen different answers about saving people with a smile, about being a symbol of peace. But that boy was gone. Because people will be afraid of me, Izuku said, his voice steady. They'll see what I can do, what's inside me, and they'll see a monster. Sukuna, he wants me to be a monster. He tells me that power is all that matters. And this other power? Red and blue, it's too big. It's terrifying. He turned to face his mentor, his blue eyes glowing with fierce determination. I have to prove him wrong. I have to prove everyone wrong. I'm going to UA to learn how to control this. To refine it. I'm going to take this cursed power, and these godlike abilities, and I'm going to force them to become tools for heroism. I'm not going to be the next symbol of peace. I can't be, but I can be the one who stands between the world and the things it can't handle. I have to prove that even with a curse in my soul, I can still be a hero. Toshinori Yagi looked at the young man before him. No longer a boy. He saw the strength in his body, the power in his eyes, and the unwavering resolve in his heart. He was not the successor he had been looking for. He was something new. Something more. Something necessary. He pulled Izuku into a hug, the gesture surprising them both. Go then, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Go and show them all what a true hero looks like. The gates of UA High loomed before Izuku like the entrance to a modern pantheon. For 10 years, this had been his Mecca, a holy site of heroism he dreamed of one day visiting. Now, standing before it, he felt a strange sense of detachment. The nervous, starstruck boy who would have tripped over his own feet in awe was gone, replaced by a young man humming with a quiet, terrifying power. His 6 eyes saw the gates not as mere steel and concrete, but as a complex lacework of alloys, internal mechanisms, and faint, dormant energy signatures from the school's high-tech security system. It was just another set of variables in a world made of them. He walked through the gates, his infinity field active but tuned to a low passive state. It was second nature now, a soft hum of energy just beneath his skin, filtering the world. He felt the countless gazes of the other applicants, 1,000 points of pressure from their nervous energy, their excitement, their fear. It was a cacophony of emotion that washed over his senses, but he remained an island of calm in the center of the storm. Look at them, Sakuna's voice purred from the back of his mind, a lazy predator observing a herd of deer. So full of pathetic hope. Brimming with trivial little powers, I could extinguish them all with a single thought. It would be a mercy, really. Culling the weak. Izuku mentally pushed the voice down, compartmentalizing it. It was just background noise. He found his seat in the massive orientation auditorium, the sheer scale of the place designed to inspire awe. The lights dimmed, and the voice hero, Present Mike, erupted onto the stage with a deafening "Ayyyyyyyyyy." The explosive greeting sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. For Izuku, it was a concussive wave of sound that his infinity automatically softened before it hit his eardrums, reducing the hero's bellow to a conversational volume. He listened as Present Mike explained the practical exam, a 10-minute mock battle in a massive, simulated urban environment. The goal was to score points by disabling robotic villains. There were 3 main types: 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers, each with varying degrees of difficulty. Then, a stern-looking boy with dark blue hair and glasses shot to his feet, chopping the air with a rigid hand. "Excuse me. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a great disgrace for a prestigious institution like UA." He then turned, his arm sweeping to point directly at Izuku. "And you, with the messy hair, you have been muttering to yourself this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not here to take this seriously, then you should leave." 100 pairs of eyes turned to Izuku. The old Izuku would have shrunk into his seat, a stammering, apologetic mess. The new Izuku simply met the boy's intense gaze with his own calm, piercing blue one. He hadn't even realized he was muttering, his mind having been subconsciously analyzing the energy output of the auditorium's sound system. "He's a distraction," Izuku said, his voice quiet yet carrying a strange resonance that cut through the silence. The words were for the boy, but also for himself, a mantra against the voice in his head. "Don't let him control your actions." The blue-haired boy, Tenya Ida, was taken aback by the strange, serene intensity of the reply. Before he could retort, Present Mike cut in. All right, examinee 7111, thanks for the question. The 4th villain is a 0-pointer. It's an arena trap, a gimmick. Think of it as a thwomp from Super Mario Bros. There's no point in fighting it, so I recommend you avoid it." With the orientation concluded, the students were herded onto buses and taken to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before the towering gates of Battle Center B, a sprawling, deserted cityscape of concrete and glass. The other examinees were a bundle of nerves, stretching and activating their quirks. A girl with a kind face and rosy cheeks seemed to be trying to psych herself up, her hands clasped together. A boy with explosive blonde hair, whom Izuku recognized with a pang of complicated emotion as Kaken, was cracking his knuckles, a predatory grin on his face. He was in a different battle center, thankfully. Izuku wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. As the gates began to slide open, Present Mike's voice boomed from unseen speakers. "And start." The other students stood in confused silence. "What's wrong?" "The test's begun. Run! Run! There's no countdown in a real fight." That was the catalyst. The pack surged forward, a stampede of quirks and ambition. Izuku, however, did not run. He simply walked. He strolled into the faux city as if he were taking a leisurely walk in the park, his hands tucked into his pockets. This wasn't a test of speed for him. It was a test of precision. Observation room. In a darkened room filled with monitors, the faculty of UA watched the examinees. Principal Nizu, a small, white-furred creature of indeterminate species, sat sipping tea. Snipe, Cementos, Ectoplasm, and a dozen other pro-heroes murmured amongst themselves, pointing out promising candidates. "That blonde kid in Battle Center A is a real powerhouse," Midnight noted, watching Bakugo obliterate a 3-pointer with a massive explosion. "Incredible destructive capability and mobility." "The girl with the engine legs in Center C shows excellent situational awareness," Cementos added. Aizawa Shoda, also known as the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead, stood in the corner, his arms crossed, his expression one of profound boredom. He scanned the monitors, his tired eyes looking for a spark of something beyond raw power. His gaze landed on a monitor for Battle Center B. He saw a cluster of students frantically fighting a group of 1-pointers. And then he saw him. A green-haired boy, walking calmly through the chaos, not a single robot even attempting to engage him. "Nizu," Aizawa said, his voice a low drawl. Who is the boy in B7? Izuku Midoriya. His application says quirk, unregistered. Nisa's whiskers twitched. Ah, yes. The special case. The one All Might personally recommended we watch. His file is anomalous. On the screen, a two-pointer robot rolled towards Izuku, its single red eye glowing. It raised a pincer arm to strike. The other heroes leaned in, curious to see what this seemingly passive boy would do. Izuku didn't even break his stride. The robot's arm swung down, only to stop dead a millimeter from his head, held by the invisible, inviolable wall of his infinity. The robot, its programming unable to comprehend the physics-defying barrier, continued to push, its motors whining under the strain. Izuku sighed, a faint wisp of condensation in the cool air. It was all so noisy. He raised a hand, not toward the robot, but to the 150 feet to its left. He crooked his index finger. A tiny point of brilliant blue light appeared in the air between the two robots. Lapse blue. The effect was instantaneous and devastatingly efficient. The two robots, along with a third one that happened to be nearby, were yanked from their feet as if roped by an unseen lasso. They flew toward the blue singularity, their metal bodies screeching as they were pulled. They collided with a deafening crunch, crumpling into a single, compact ball of scrap metal. The blue light vanished. Silence fell over the observation room. What was that? Snipe asked, breaking the quiet. Some kind of superpowered magnetism? No, Nisa said, his black eyes gleaming with an intense, analytical light. There was no magnetic signature. The energy reading was nothing. It's like the sensors can't even perceive what he's using. It was a spatial distortion. He pulled them together. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. The boy hadn't touched them. He made a gesture from 50 feet away and they had imploded. It was efficient. It was terrifying. And it was unlike any quirk he had ever seen. Battle Center B. Izuku continued his unhurried stroll through the city. The other examinees gave him a wide berth. They had seen what he'd done. He was an anomaly, an unknown variable they didn't want to get near. For Izuku, this was perfect. It gave him room to operate. His goal wasn't just destruction. All Might had been clear: show them control. Show them precision. Show them that you are not a mindless weapon. He saw a group of 3 one-pointers cornering the kind-faced girl from the entrance. She was touching the robots, causing them to float helplessly into the air due to her zero-gravity quirk, but she was starting to look nauseous from overuse. Another robot was approaching from behind her. Izuku didn't shout a warning. He simply raised his hand. A small, almost imperceptible thread of his energy shot out. It wasn't red or blue. It was a simple application of his control over cursed energy, something Sakuna had sneeringly taught him in a dream. He called it cutting energy. You're using my technique like a child's scalpel, Sakuna's voice mocked. Still, better than nothing. The invisible dismantle, sliced cleanly through the approaching robot's leg servos. It stumbled and collapsed into a heap, sparking harmlessly. The girl, Achiko Uraraka, whipped around in surprise seeing the disabled robot. She looked around for her savior, but Izuku was already moving on, melting back into the urban landscape. He continued this pattern for the next few minutes. He wasn't a whirlwind of destruction like Bakugo. He was a ghost, an arbiter of efficiency. He would disable robots threatening other students from a distance, using pinpoint applications of his power. He used blue to pull a robot's legs out from under it, sending it crashing to the ground. He used a flicker of red to blast the weapon off a 3-pointer's arm, disarming it without destroying it entirely. He used dismantle to sever hydraulic lines and power cables with surgical precision. His point counter remained stubbornly low. He was racking up dozens of rescue points, a secret metric the judges used to reward heroic behavior. But his villain point score was paltry compared to the others who were causing massive, explosive takedowns. He didn't care. This wasn't a game of points. It was a demonstration. Observation room. His score is abysmal, one of the faculty members noted, looking at the leaderboard. He's barely in the top 30 for villain points. But look at his rescue point counter, Recovery Girl piped up, pointing a cane at another screen. It's off the charts. He's intervened to save other examinees 12 times already. Non-lethal takedowns, defensive maneuvers, disabling traps. He's acting more like a seasoned pro on patrol than a student taking an exam. Aizawa watched, his expression unreadable. The boy was a paradox. His power was absurdly, terrifyingly destructive, yet his application of it was restrained, almost gentle. He fought with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon, not the fiery passion of a rookie. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. It was profoundly unsettling. He's not trying to win, Aizawa murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He's trying to make a statement. Suddenly, the ground shook. A deep, grinding rumble echoed through all the battle centers. On the monitors, a shadow fell over the cityscape of Battle Center B. It's time for the main event. Nizu chirped, his paws steepled. A colossal robot, taller than the highest skyscraper in the arena, rose from between the buildings. Its massive form blocked out the sun. This was the zero-pointer. Its single, massive red eye scanned the fleeing students below. It was pure, overwhelming spectacle. Its purpose was to induce panic, to test how the examinees reacted to an insurmountable obstacle. Battle Center B. Panic erupted. The students who had been fighting so bravely moments before turned and fled, their faces pale with terror. It's the zero-pointer. Run! We can't fight that thing. Izuku stood his ground, his head tilted back to take in the sheer scale of the machine. To his 6 eyes, it was a beautiful, complex machine, a mountain of circuitry, hydraulics, and dormant power. He could see its primary power core glowing deep within its chest, a sun of captured energy. Now this is more interesting, Sakuna said, a flicker of genuine excitement in his voice. Smash it, brat. Turn it into a monument of twisted metal. Show them all what real power looks like. Izuku ignored him. He had no intention of fighting it. As President Mike said, it was a gimmick? There was no point. He turned to walk away, to find more smaller fry robots to disable for points. Then he heard a cry. Ow! He turned back. Lying on the ground, her leg trapped under a large piece of rubble dislodged by the robot's emergence, was the gravity girl, Achiko Uraraka. Her face was a mask of pain and fear as the zero-pointer's colossal foot began to descend, right on top of her. The other examinees didn't even notice. They were too busy saving themselves. Izuku's blood ran cold. The scene played out in his mind with the hyperspeed clarity of his 6 eyes. The robot's footfall was 3 seconds away. The rubble was too heavy to move in time. Her quirk was useless against an object of this mass. She was going to be crushed. All Might's words from their training echoed in his ears. You are the one who stands between the world and the things it can handle. There was no choice. There was never a choice. He didn't run. He appeared. He used a short-range application of blue to pull himself across the 50-yard distance in an instant, a green blur that no normal eye could track. He came to a stop directly between Uraraka and the descending foot of the giant robot. She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. You! Izuku didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the approaching threat. The shadow of the robot's foot enveloped them. This was it. The first true test of his power against an overwhelming force. He could just use red and blast the foot to pieces. But that would be messy. It would rain shrapnel down on the entire area, endangering the girl he was trying to save. It would be an uncontrolled display of raw destruction. It was what Sukuna wanted. He could use blue to try and pull it off course, but the mass was too great. He would end up pulling the entire city block with it. No, he thought, his mind working at the speed of light. Not destruction. Not redirection. Erasure. He raised his right hand, palm facing up. A swirling ball of angry crimson light, crackling with positive energy, formed above it. Reversal, red. He raised his left hand, palm facing down. A vortex of deep, hungry blue, humming with negative energy, materialized beneath it. Lapse blue. He brought his hands together. Observation room. A collective gasp went through the room. Is that kid insane? He's going to be flattened. Aizawa's eyes widened, his usual apathy shattering. He gripped the railing in front of him, his knuckles white. He could feel it, even through the monitors. An energy signature that wasn't registering on their sensors, but that his hero's intuition screamed was reaching a critical, impossible level. The very air around the boy on the screen seemed to be warping, bending light. What is he doing? Midnight whispered, horrified. Niza was no longer smiling. He was standing on his chair, his fur on end, his eyes glued to the monitor. He was witnessing the birth of something that would redefine their understanding of power. Battle Center B. As his hands came together, Izuku brought the index finger of his right hand and the index finger of his left hand close. He could feel the two opposing forces straining against his control, the repulsive force of red and the attractive force of blue, two infinities colliding. It was like holding a star in one hand and a black hole in the other. Imaginary technique. He whispered the words, an incantation he had practiced only in his mind, derived from the pure physics his 6 eyes allowed him to perceive. He brought his fingers together, hollow purple. There was no explosion. No roar. There was only absence. A small, spherical orb of swirling, purple-black energy, no bigger than a bowling ball, materialized between his hands. It didn't radiate light, it seemed to devour it. It didn't make a sound, it seemed to consume it. For a single, terrifying moment, everything within a 50-foot radius of Izuku, the sound of the robot's grinding gears, the panic screams of the students, the very color of the world, seemed to be sucked into that tiny, silent sphere. Then, he launched it. The orb shot forward, not with the speed of a projectile, but with the instantaneousness of a concept. It didn't travel through space, it erased the space it traveled through. It hit the zero-pointer's head, and the head ceased to exist. It didn't explode. It didn't crumple. One moment, the colossal, multi-ton head of the robot was there. The next, it was gone, replaced by a perfectly spherical hole of empty air. The erasure continued, boring a clean, silent tunnel straight through the robot's torso and out its back, taking its massive power core with it. The buildings behind the robot were also caught in the path of the attack. A perfect, silent tunnel was carved straight through 3 city blocks, ending in the distant arena wall, which now had a perfectly circular hole in it leading to the outside world. For a moment, the colossal, headless body of the zero-pointer remained standing, a monument of silent absurdity. Then, its balance lost, it began to topple backward, away from Izuku and Uraraka. It crashed to the ground with a ground-shaking boom that was the first sound to break the spell of silence. Izuku stood panting, his arms still outstretched. The backlash from using the technique was immense, a phantom ache that ran through every cell in his body. He had practiced the theory, but this was the first time he had unleashed it. The sheer scale of its effect was more than he had anticipated. He turned to the girl, his face pale but his expression calm. He used a gentle pulse of blue to lift the slab of concrete off her leg. "Can you stand?" Uraraka could only stare. She stared at him, then at the headless, annihilated robot, then at the impossible tunnel carved through the cityscape behind it. Her mind simply refused to process what her eyes had just seen. It was a power that defied logic, a feat that not even All Might in his prime could have replicated with such clean, terrifying finality. "Tea time's up." President Mick's voice crackled over the speakers, his usual enthusiasm replaced by a tone of complete and utter shock. The practical exam was over. Observation room. The faculty of UA stood in stunned, absolute silence. Jaws were on the floor. Teacups were frozen halfway to lips. Even Nizu was speechless, his mind, with its high-spec quirk, struggling to calculate the physics of what it had just witnessed. Aizawa was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were bone-white. He had seen villains with horrifyingly destructive quirks. He had fought monsters that could level buildings. He had never, in his entire career, seen anything like that. It wasn't destruction. It was uncreation. A targeted erasure of reality. His name. Cementos finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling slightly. "Izuku Midoriya." Aizawa let go of the railing. The look of boredom on his face was gone, replaced by an expression of deep, profound trouble. This boy was not just another promising student. He wasn't a hero in training, he was an event. A walking, talking singularity whose power operated on a level they couldn't even begin to measure, let alone understand. He had walked into their exam, scored almost no conventional points, and ended it by casually demonstrating the ability to erase matter from existence. It was the most terrifying, most impressive, and most problematic exam performance in the history of UA High. Nizu, Aizawa said, his voice a low, serious growl. He passes. Nizu finally snapped out of his stupor, a slow, slightly manic grin spreading across his face. The fear in the room was replaced by a spark of terrifying academic curiosity in the principal's eyes. "Oh, Aizawa-kun," the principal chirped, his voice filled with a glee that bordered on madness. "Passing was never in question. The question is, what in the world are we going to do with a student who might just be the single most powerful individual on the planet?" The acceptance letter from Yue arrived in a sleek, unassuming envelope. It contained a small, disc-shaped projector that, when activated, displayed a hologram of a triumphant All Might. "I am here." As a projection, he boomed, before coughing and shrinking down to his skeletal form. Tashinori Yagi then proceeded to explain the results of the entrance exam. "Young Midoriya, on the surface your performance was less than stellar," he began, a knowing glint in his eye. "You scored a meager 12 villain points, placing you far down the list of applicants." Izuku watched, his expression unreadable. His mother, however, wrung her hands, her face falling. "But," Tashinori continued, holding up a finger, "the practical exam was not graded on villain takedowns alone. We heroes must also be judged on our capacity to save others." Behold! A screen flickered to life behind the hologram, displaying the leaderboard for rescue points. Izuku's name was at the very top, Izuku Midoriya 90 rescue points. The next highest score was a distant 45. Your constant interventions, your precise, non-lethal methods of disabling threats to other examinees, and your ultimate act of saving young Uraraka from the zero-pointer earned you the highest rescue score in the history of this exam, Tashinori explained, his voice swelling with pride. "Villain points, rescue points, combined you passed with flying colors. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia." Inko Midoriya burst into tears of pure, unadulterated relief, hugging her son so tightly he could barely breathe. Izuku managed a small, genuine smile. He had done it. He had taken the first step on his impossible path. He was officially a student of UA High. How quaint! Sakuna's voice echoed in the quiet of his mind, a drop of acid in the celebratory moment. "You are celebrating your admission into a cage full of children. Do not forget, brat, that your true power lies not in saving the weak, but in dominating them." The voice was a chilling reminder that this was not a normal victory. His acceptance wasn't just a testament to his hard work. It was UA unknowingly inviting a calamity through its front gates. The first day of school was a surreal experience. Walking the hallowed halls in the crisp, new UA uniform felt like a dream. He found his way to the colossal door of Class 1A, a barrier designed for students with size-altering quirks, and took a deep breath. His 6 eyes perceived the energy signatures of 20 other unique individuals on the other side, a vibrant tapestry of power. He slid the door open to a scene of controlled chaos. The rigid, blue-haired boy from the orientation, Tenya Ida, was admonishing Kaken for having his feet on the desk. Kaken, in turn, was telling him in no uncertain terms where he could shove his criticisms. Izuku felt a familiar pang of anxiety, a ghost of his former self, but he quelled it. He was not that person anymore. "Oh! It's you!" a cheerful voice exclaimed. He turned to see the gravity girl, Achiko Uraraka, bounding over to him, her face lit up with a brilliant smile. "The one who saved me. Your performance with that giant robot was incredible. It was like whoosh and then FZZZZT and then it was just gone." "My name's Achiko Uraraka, Izuku Midoriya," he replied, offering a small, polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, Uraraka-san. If you're all here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A new voice, low and profoundly tired, cut through the chatter. The students turned to see a man lying on the floor by the door, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a miserable caterpillar. He slowly unzipped himself and rose to his feet, revealing a man with a perpetually exhausted expression, messy black hair, and a scarf that seemed to defy gravity. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, his voice a monotone drone. "Time is a precious resource. You're not being rational." He took a sip from a juice pouch. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. The class collectively stiffened. This disheveled man was a pro-hero? Right, let's get to it, Aizawa continued, pulling a UA gym uniform from his sleeping bag. Put these on and meet me on the P grounds. On the field, under the morning sun, Aizawa addressed the bewildered class. Today, we'll be conducting a quirk apprehension test. A chorus of confused murmurs rose from the students. A quirk test on the first day. Uraraka whispered. But what about orientation? And the opening ceremony? Yui is not a normal school, Aizawa stated, his gaze sweeping over them. I have complete autonomy over how I run my class. You've all been using your quirks without proper training for years. We need to establish a baseline. Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo stepped forward, his usual arrogant smirk firmly in place. You got the highest score in the practical exam, Aizawa said. What was your farthest softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed, tossing him a softball. Do whatever you want, just stay in the circle. Bakugo wound up, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He hurled the ball, and at the last second, ignited a massive explosion from his palm. Die, he roared, the blast propelling the ball like a cannon shot. It sailed high into the air, a tiny speck against the blue sky. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped, and he showed them the screen. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited chatter. 705 meters? That's insane. We can use our quirks for real. This is going to be fun. Fun? Aizawa's voice dropped, and the temperature of the field seemed to plummet with it. A dark, predatory aura radiated from him. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun times? You are here to push your limits, to suffer, to risk your lives. So, new rule. Whoever comes in last place in today's test will be judged as having zero potential and will be expelled immediately. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the students. Expulsion on the first day? It was insane, tyrannical. But one look at Aizawa's dead serious expression told them he wasn't bluffing. Now this is a proper teacher, Sukuna commented in Izuku's mind, a rare note of approval in his voice. Culling the weak from the start. I approve. The tests began. The 50-meter dash, the grip strength test, the long jump. Students used their quirks in creative and powerful ways. Ida used his engines to clear the dash in just over 3 seconds. Aoyama propelled himself backward with his naval laser in the long jump. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless to improve her agility. Izuku performed adequately. He didn't use his abilities. His 10 months of brutal physical training with all might had honed his body to a fine edge. He was strong, fast, and agile, easily placing in the upper middle of the pack using pure physical prowess alone. But he knew this was just the prelude. The main event was coming. Aizawa was watching him. He could feel the man's gaze on him during every test, a heavy, analytical weight. The teacher hadn't forgotten the unregistered quirk, the anomalous exam performance. He was waiting. The softball throw was the 5th test. One by one, students stepped up. Uraraka, touching the ball, made it weightless and scored an infinity symbol, which drew a tired sigh from Aizawa. Then, it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the familiar weight of the ball in his hand. He could feel 20 pairs of eyes on him, plus Aizawa's particularly intense stare. They had seen his impressive physical scores, but they were all waiting to see his quirk. The quirk that had erased the 10-story robot. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He couldn't use hollow purple. He couldn't even use a full power red. The goal wasn't to show off his destructive capability. The goal, as always, was control. He wound up his arm, preparing to throw. He would just give the ball a gentle nudge with red, enough to send it a respectable distance without breaking anything. As his arm came forward, he felt a strange, cold sensation wash over him, like being doused in icy water. The air grew heavy, and suddenly, the hum of his infinity field, the constant, low-level energy shield he maintained around himself, sputtered and died. The 6 eyes still worked, He could see the world with the same impossible clarity, but his ability to manipulate space, his cursed energy, was gone. He looked up at Aizawa. The teacher's posture had changed. His messy black hair was floating, his eyes were glowing a menacing red, and the strange scarf around his neck was writhing like a nest of serpents. "I am the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead," Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. "My quirk, Erasure, allows me to cancel out the quirks of anyone I look at. I saw your exam footage, Midoriya. A power like that, which can erase city blocks, is not suited for heroism if it cannot be controlled. You were planning on using it just now, weren't you? Planning on breaking your own body and relying on others to fix you, just like so many other reckless power types?" The class murmured in shock. Aizawa's quirk was incredible. A perfect counter for powerful villains. Izuku, however, was not looking at Aizawa's hair or his glowing eyes. He was looking at his own hand. The infinity was gone, yes. He could feel the breeze on his skin for the first time in months. But something was wrong with Aizawa's assumption. "He thinks it's a quirk," Izuku realized. "The fool is trying to erase a concept with a biological trick," Sukuna sneered. "How amusing. Show him his mistake, brat." Izuku looked back at his teacher, his bright blue eyes holding no fear, only a calm, analytical curiosity. "You're mistaken, sensei." "Mistaken?" Aizawa's visible eye narrowed. "My ability," Izuku said, his voice steady. "You can't erase it," Aizawa scoffed. "I've erased the quirks of the most powerful villains in Japan. There's no quirk my power can handle." "That's the point," Izuku said, taking a half step back in the circle. "It's not a quirk." As he said the words, he reasserted his will. Not through any biological function, but through pure, conscious control. He focused, reached out with his mind, and re-established the delicate, infinitely thin barrier of space around his body. The infinity field hummed back to life. Aizawa felt it. Or rather, he didn't feel it. His erasure was still active, his gaze locked on Izuku. By all rights, the boy should be quirkless. But Aizawa could see the subtle shimmer in the air around him, could feel the almost imperceptible pressure of a power that was simply refusing to be turned off. It was like trying to use a magnet to stop a river. The tool was completely ineffective against the nature of the target. His hair fell. His eyes stopped glowing. Aizawa blinked, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. It was the first time in his entire career that his erasure had failed. Not just been overpowered, but completely, fundamentally failed to even connect with its target. The rest of the class was oblivious to the silent, reality-bending confrontation that had just occurred. All they saw was Aizawa's quirk deactivating. "What are you?" Aizawa asked, his voice a low, shaken whisper that only Izuku could hear. Izuku didn't answer with words. He answered with his throw. He brought his arm back again. This time, there was no hesitation. He tossed the ball lightly, an easy, underhanded throw. As it left his fingertips, he focused. He didn't use a massive, explosive force. He applied a single, concentrated, perfectly calibrated pulse of repelling energy. Reversal, red. It was a tiny, invisible pinprick of force, but it contained the conceptual power of divergence. The ball didn't explode. It didn't catch fire. It simply accelerated. To an impossible degree. There was no sonic boom. The application of force was so clean, so perfect, that it pushed the air out of the way before a boom could form. One moment, the ball was in front of him. The next, it was a rapidly vanishing speck that disappeared into the upper atmosphere. It broke through the clouds, escaped the stratosphere, and was now, for all intents and purposes, in low orbit. The class stared in stunned silence. There was no grand explosion like Bakugo's, no visual spectacle. Just a simple throw and a result that defied all logic. Aizawa's device beeped frantically in his hand before flashing an error symbol. An infinity sign. The same score as Uraraka, but achieved through a completely different, and infinitely more terrifying, principle. Bakugo's jaw was on the floor, his red eyes wide with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and a terrifying, creeping sense of irrelevance. He had trained his quirk his entire life, perfecting his explosions, and Deku, useless, quirkless Deku, had just surpassed him with a casual flick of the wrist, without even breaking a sweat. It was a power that operated on a plane of existence he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The rest of the tests passed in a blur. Izuku continued to use only his physical abilities, easily securing a spot in the top 5. He didn't need to use his powers again. He had already made his point. At the end of the test, Aizawa displayed the final scores. Izuku was ranked 4th. In last place was a short, purple-haired boy named Minoru Mineta, who was currently sobbing on the ground. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said with a deadpan expression, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It was a rational deception to make you push your limits. The class erupted in outrage, save for a tall, black-haired girl who correctly deduced his gambit. As the other students began to head back to the locker rooms, Aizawa's voice cut through the air. Midoriya, stay behind. The other students filed away, casting curious glances at Izuku. Soon, it was just the two of them on the vast, empty field. The sun was high in the sky, but Izuku felt a chill. This was the real test. Aizawa walked until he was standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. I'm going to ask you again, he said, his voice low and serious. And I want a straight answer this time. What is that power? Izuku looked down at the ground. He thought of All Might's advice. Don't tell them everything at once. Let them see what you can do first. Let them see your heart. But Aizawa was not a man who dealt in half-truths. He was a man who valued rationality and information above all else. It's complicated, Izuku began, choosing his words carefully. I have time, Aizawa countered, his gaze unwavering. Izuku took a deep breath. The ability I use, the one that creates the barrier and lets me manipulate space, it's an inherited trait. It's not in the quirk registry because it's not a biological function in the traditional sense. It's more like an awakening, a potential that has laid dormant in my family line for generations, only surfacing under immense stress. Aizawa listened, his expression skeptical but intrigued. It was a flimsy explanation, but it wasn't outside the realm of possibility for quirk science, which was still full of unknowns. And the other power? He pressed. The one from the exam? The one that defeated the sludge villain months ago? That felt different. Darker. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was the dangerous part. The part that could get him locked away forever. He looked up, and for a split second, Aizawa saw something that made his blood run cold. Midoriya's calm blue eyes flickered, and a shadow of something ancient and malevolent passed through them. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable killing intent. Black markings, like jagged, arcane tattoos, crawled up Izuku's neck and cheek for a single, terrifying instant. He wouldn't understand the nature of a curse. The voice that spoke was not Midoriya's. It was deeper, rougher, and resonated with 1,000 years of malice and contempt. It was a voice that belonged on a throne of bones, not in the body of a teenage boy. A second pair of eyes, blood-red and slitted, began to form on Izuku's cheeks before he forcefully suppressed them. Aizawa instinctively took a step back, his hand flying to the capture weapon around his neck. His hero's intuition, honed by a decade of fighting the worst villains in the underbelly of society, was screaming at him. He wasn't looking at a student. He was looking at a vessel. A cage. And for a brief moment, the prisoner had looked out through the bars. Izuku gasped, the markings receding, the oppressive aura vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He stumbled, clutching his head, his own green eyes. They had reverted for a moment in his distress before snapping back to blue, wide with panic. I am sorry, he stammered, his control slipping. Sometimes he gets out. The fear in Aizawa's gut was quickly replaced by a chilling understanding. Midoriya wasn't just a boy with two quirks. He was a boy with one incredible, godlike power, who was simultaneously acting as a jailer for a second, parasitic entity. The unregistered quirk was a massive, terrifying understatement. He was dealing with something that felt completely outside the known paradigms of human ability. Aizawa lowered his hand. His expression was no longer one of suspicion, but of grim, heavy concern. This changed everything. Midoriya wasn't a potential threat because of his power's destructiveness. He was a threat because he was fundamentally unstable. He was a walking civil war. From this moment on, you are on probation, Aizawa said, his voice regaining its authority, but now laced with a new weight. You will report to me every day after school. You will not use the other power unless I give you explicit permission, or it is a life or death situation. We will work on control, on containment. Am I understood? It wasn't a punishment. It was a lifeline. Aizawa was offering not to expel him, but to help him. To teach him. Izuka looked up at his teacher, his breathing still ragged, and nodded. Yes, sensei. Understood. Good, Aizawa said, turning to walk away. Now go to the locker room. You're late. As Aizawa walked back toward the main school building, he felt a weariness that had nothing to do with his usual lack of sleep. He had thought this year's class would be another crop of overconfident kids with flashy quirks he would have to whip into shape. Instead, he had been handed a child wrestling with a demon, who possessed a power that defied the very laws of physics. Principal Nizu was right. This wasn't a matter of simply training a new hero. It was a matter of managing a crisis that no one else in the world even knew existed. And it was now, for better or worse, his responsibility.